started here. Make sure we're on. All right. Let me just double check here, make sure it sounds good. Hate to have to keep doing this. Is it good? I think so. Try to make the PowerPoint a little bit bigger because what we're doing tonight. Okay. Those that are watching at home with the screen, part of my head may be in and part of it may be out. But I try to make the PowerPoint as big, as large as I could, so you can see the timeline that we're going over, and those that are here. Now we've done this before. It's been a while since we've done a timeline. Okay, sometimes since probably July or August actually of last year. The reason I want to review over the timeline is because the last 7 or 8 weeks we have just been in John chapter 5, and so I don't want us to forget where we are in the life of the Lord. Also, on this, I want to make, when I say make some corrections on what I thought. Okay, and now I've never done a timeline on the life of the Lord before. Okay, so as we're doing this as a church, I'm also learning. And so there's several things that when I say got out of order, just doing more study, it's like, oh, you know what, this event that happened, this event that happened down here in our study actually seems to have happened a little bit earlier. And so I kind of want to address that. Now, also, this is just a reminder. This is when we're reading the Bible. Now, we have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and then John. Okay? That is not the order in which they were originally written. Okay? But that is the order that, since they really started putting all the Gospels together, that's pretty much the order that the majority of the early church held to. It's believed that Mark is actually probably the first gospel that was written. Okay, and then Matthew and Luke at some point after that, and then John is the last gospel that was written. Now, the reason I say that is just for your own knowledge and understanding. Okay, liberal theologians or scholars, okay, they put the Gospels have as having been written like in AD 80, AD 90, even around AD 100. Now, when you put things together and we use the destruction of Jerusalem as sort of the central point, the destruction of Jerusalem happened in AD 70, okay? When you read the Gospels and you read every book in the New Testament, except for the exception of the book of Revelation, and maybe the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, the majority of the books seem to indicate they were written before the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. There's no mention of it in all the Gospels, even in the Gospel of John. Something that John may have been written in AD 90, but there's no description at all in John's Gospel of the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. And as a matter of fact, what we just studied in John chapter 5 with Jesus going to the pool at Siloam and raising that guy and healing this man, the man that couldn't walk on the Sabbath day, he's writing it, and the way that it is being written is being written to people who know that about this pool, they know where it is, they know the location of it, and that they are familiar with it. Now, the reason why I am mentioning that is that the Gospels seem to have been written very early, AD 50 to AD 60. And the reason why that is important is that's only about 20, 25 years after the death and the burial and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And that's extremely important in these men in their telling of this story. Now, also, I do believe that the Gospel of Luke, and I've mentioned this, I think that the Gospel of Luke is giving a more chronological order than Matthew and Mark. Now, Mark and Luke follow a very similar pattern as opposed to what Matthew does. Now, Having said that, there are times where I believe that Luke is not writing in a chronological order, okay? And we're going to see that, okay? Which is one of the things where I moved, where I think that where something in Matthew seems to indicate that another event happened before Mark and Luke mention it, okay? But this is not a big deal. Now, I know this is kind of just talking, and I think that this needs to be said and needs to be understood, okay? One complaint, argument, attack against the Gospels, okay, is this. Why are the Gospels different? You know, Matthew, Mark, and Luke especially tell a lot of the same stories, but why are they giving different accounts? Why are they giving different words over here? Why are they giving different words over there? You know, this says this man came, but what about this? And so there's differences of the story being lined up. And so this is the attack. Well, if they are, you know, if they're the same event, why are they so different? Okay, but then there is another attack that comes just with that. And that is and that's this. Not only, because it's kind of weird, because what they say is well, why are they different? And why are they not the same? Okay, now in police work, and this is a little weird to say, I know police work, but what is something that when they're investigating a crime and there's 3, 4, 5 people involved with the crime, what is something that will throw up a red flag to them when they are investigating the individual people by themselves? What do they watch for? One thing they watch for is story collaboration. If there's 4 witnesses or 5 witnesses and they all say the same thing and it lines up perfectly, what does that do? That throws up a red flag to the investigators. Okay, wait a minute. These guys are getting their story straight. You got 3 teenagers or 4 teenagers, you know, and they're not supposed to be playing outside, and they cracked a window with the baseball. Well, when they come and find out, we got to tell them, oh, this is what happened. And they get their story just right, okay? Now, I'm saying all of that to say this. The fact that the gospel writers tell the same stories, but they tell them in different ways, shows that they're not collaborating within their stories. They're not getting together and ironing all the details out so they match up just perfect. So this is the point, though, is that both arguments, both attacks are made against the Bible. In one place, they'll say, you see, all 3 of the Gospels are telling all 3 of the same story. See, that shows they got together. But right out the very next argument they make, though, is this. Well, why don't all their stories line up word for word? Do you see what I'm saying? They try to have both. They want to attack the Bible because it all lines up, or they want to attack the Bible because none of it lines up. You see what, you know, there's differences. And so I'm saying that to emphasize the authenticity of the Gospels themselves. That there are similarities and yet there are differences, and the similarities along with the differences show, though, that these men are giving their perspective of what happened. They're telling their story. They are telling the events in their lives and what they learned and what they saw. So, having said that, I believe Luke is giving more of a chronological order. I think that Luke and Mark are very similar in their pattern structure and the events that happen. Matthew is writing more from this topical, he lumps certain events together, like the Sermon on the Mount, boom, and then Matthew, the end of Matthew chapter number 8 and 9, and he puts these together, and then the parables of the kingdom, he puts all of those together, and so he's writing in a different perspective. And so, having said that, let's go over some of the timeline. And hopefully this will be somewhat big enough on the screen for those that are watching at home to be able to follow along a little bit. I'm not going to go into on page number 1, we have 14 events, okay, that we have listed out right here. And those that are watching at home and those that are tuning in later, I'm going to try to upload this PowerPoint in the little description area beneath the title on the YouTube chat on the page, so you can open it up if you have a hard time seeing this from home. But on our first page, and it's 1 through 14, we start with the birth of Jesus in number 1, and then in number 14, we have Jesus goes to Jerusalem and he cleanses the temple. Now we have the different scripture references underneath each of these. You can follow along with this. Write go back a little bit later on and look at this. Number 1, he has his birth. Number 2, there is the temple visit. And then we have the visit of the wise men. Then we have him going to Egypt and he returns to Nazareth. Now, again, I'm just showing these because what happens is when you read the Gospel of Luke, just for an example, and I want to encourage you to keep this, we'll try to get it on YouTube where you can print this off. Look at number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 here, and even number 6, okay? If you read the Gospel of Luke chapter number 2, verse 1 through 7, and then the next section in Luke is Luke 2, 21 through verse number 38. Now, I don't have this on the handout, but on the birth right there with Luke, that would be the visit of the shepherds also. Okay, that's all happening up through verse number 20 of Luke chapter number 2. But then the next thing that happens is the visit of the wise men. But Luke doesn't mention that. And so sometimes there's confusion. Well, did the wise men come the same night as the shepherds? Did the shepherds come the same night as the wise men? When the shepherds come, he's born in a stable, and he is in Bethlehem. So what's going on? But then you read Matthew, he's in a house. They stop by Jerusalem on the way to go find him. There is some differences of events. There's a whole completely different setting. Well, why? Well, because there's 2 separate events that are happening at 2 separate times. And then in Matthew, on number 4, we have that he goes to Egypt. Again, Luke doesn't mention that. Number 5, he returns to Nazareth. Well, Matthew mentions that, and Luke mentions it. But when you read the Gospel of Luke, there's no mention of the wise men, and there's no mention of him going down to Egypt. If you read Luke's Gospel, just Luke's Gospel, okay, it seems like he goes to the temple, he is circumcised, he is dedicated, and he goes straight to Nazareth. Well, there's an entire event in his life that Luke doesn't mention, but Matthew does. And so I mention that so that in your study, as you're reading, that you keep that in mind. Okay, there's something is missing. What is missing? Well, that's what's missing. Okay, and it's not a big deal that it's missing. And so we see that all the way through here on page number 1. Okay, on page number 2, we start with number. It starts with number 16. Number 15 is on page 1. Jesus stays in Jerusalem to talk to Nicodemus. Okay, we come to number 16 on page 2 is that Jesus goes to Judea. Okay, so there's a lot of things that have happened in the life of the Lord at this point, and he goes to Judea. At this point, we have John the Baptist is put in prison, and the Pharisees compare John and Jesus. We see this in Matthew 4, Mark 1, and John 4. All these references, when we line them all up, we can see how these items fit together. Okay, number 18, Jesus leaves Judea. He goes to Galilee, goes through Samaria. Okay, number 19 is when he's talking to the woman at the well. All right. Number 20, right beside that, he stays in Samaria for 2 days. And then after that, Jesus goes to Galilee. And we have the references here. Okay. We have number 21 at the top, and then we go down to number 22 at the bottom. I start staggering these out in just a few minutes instead of putting them side by side. I start staggering them out. At the bottom, number 22, Jesus enters back into Nazareth, and he heads towards Capernaum. That's the next event. From there, Jesus goes to Cana of Galilee before he goes to Capernaum, and he heals the nobleman's son. That's John 4 and verse 45. Now, when you read John 4:44 and John 4:45, there's not that much detail. It's just mentioned. This is what happened. But when you take Matthew and Luke, then you say, oh, wait a minute, this is what's happening in Luke 4. Okay, like number 22, we have Jesus enters Nazareth, and he teaches in the synagogue. He heads towards Capernaum. Okay, that is mentioned in Matthew 4, 12 and 13. Luke gives the detail of that in Luke chapter 4, verse 16 through 31. Luke goes into great detail explaining what happens while he is there at Nazareth. But then in John 4:44, he just mentions that he has no honor in his own country, in his own city. And then he leaves. And so John just mentions it in a verse. Okay? And so Luke gives more detail about it as Matthew and John. All right, verse 23. Number 23, Jesus goes to Cana of Galilee before Capernaum. Here he heals the nobleman's son in John 4:45. And that actually goes through the rest of that chapter. Okay, then we come to number 24. Jesus leaves Cana of Galilee. Now, at number 23, we have John 4:45, and then it goes through the rest of that chapter. We don't even go back to the Gospel of John for a while. I mean, like for a while. Matter of fact, we don't get to him until what we just looked at in John 5 when he heals the man at the pool. So everything else from this point seems to be taking place in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Okay? In number 24, he leaves Cana of Galilee and he goes to Capernaum. He preaches the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of God. Okay? These are not the parables. He's just simply introducing it. This is number 24 is not the beginning of his ministry. It's not the beginning of it. That's already happened. But he's about to on number 25. He's about to officially call his first disciples. Now, they've already been following him, and that was on the very first page. We didn't mention that. I didn't go into detail about that tonight. But this is what he calls his first disciples, okay? In Matthew 4, 17 through 22. We also see that in Mark 1, 16 through 15. Next, at the bottom, number 26, he enters Capernaum, casts out an unclean spirit in a synagogue. And I have this in parentheses here, in the morning of this day. Now, what happens is number 26, number 27, and number 28 is all of the same day. It's one day, and they, especially Luke and Mark, are giving us the events of that one day. Morning, afternoon, and the evening. And actually, even number 29, I know it's not super clear, I don't think, on the PowerPoint, on the video, but number 29, it says the next morning he departs into other cities. That is after that day. And so what we have here in several verses is simply one day in the life of Jesus Christ, beginning from the morning to the next morning. I mean, it's just one day. And we see that in Luke and in the Gospel of Mark. Now, on number 27, okay, that's all that same day. Matthew talks about that when he heals Simon Peter's mother-in-law. Matthew gives 2 verses. That's all. And it's right in the middle of something. Now you say, why did Matthew why is Matthew like just putting things in certain spots, almost like just because of the reason why Matthew is writing and how he is writing. Okay, he's writing not so much from a chronological perspective as much as it is a topical, sectional things that he's trying to reveal. So on number 29, the next day, he departs into other cities. Okay, Luke 4, 42 through 44. Now, the next thing that happens on the next page, page number 3, and we're trying to get through, I don't want to, okay, this is where we come to some of the changes, okay, where I think that, I put some things, I didn't teach it in the exact order. We still taught it, just didn't teach it in the right order. Number 30, he preaches around the Sea of Galilee, the miracle of the draw of fish. Now, we don't know how much time passed from Luke 4 at the end there of that chapter, verse number 44, to Luke 5. We don't know how much time has passed. But what seems to be happening, okay, is that here in Luke 5, the miracle of the draw of fish, okay, this is where Peter, James, John, and Andrew officially just followed the Lord Jesus Christ. It seems permanently that they don't go back to fishing. This is where this happens, okay? There are some that think that, well, they say, well, this is what happened in Matthew 4 when he's walking by the seaside and he sees the men and he calls them to follow. Well, but there's major differences. And that's where, again, people that, they attack the Bible, these men are getting their story all confused. Well, they're different events. One event, Jesus is walking by the seaside in Matthew 4, and they're actually cleaning their nets. In Luke, one's in a boat, one's on the shore. In Luke 5, they've just rowed in, and none of them are in their boats. They're all getting ready they're finished, and it's a completely different scene as what we see. Okay, and in Matthew 4, some of the men are still fishing. James and John are still fishing, and here in Luke 5, they're not. And then that's it for Luke. He's going to introduce us to something different. Number 31, Jesus goes about preaching and teaching in all of that region. So the next event in the life of the Lord is he goes about and he's teaching and he's preaching in the region. And we see that in Matthew 4. Then he gives the Sermon on the Mount, number 32. That's found in Matthew 4 and all the way through Matthew chapter 7. Now, this is where we start piecing things together, okay? The Lord comes down from the mountain and he heals the leper. Now, Matthew chapter 8, verse 1 tells us that, and he came down from the mountain, and here comes the leper, and he heals him, okay? Well, Luke mentions that next in his gospel, Luke 5, 12 through 16. So what seems to be happening in the life of the Lord? The Lord goes and he's teaching and he's preaching in Luke 5. He tells Peter and John, Peter and Andrew, let's go out, let's go fishing. While they're there, the Lord tells them, throw your net on the other side. They throw the net on the other side, and they pull up a bunch of fish. And that's when Peter says, Lord, depart from me, for I'm unclean, I'm unworthy, and I just depart from me. I'm not worthy of you. Okay. Well, right after that, Luke says, a leper comes to him, and he heals him. Well, when we read Matthew, we understand, and as we're putting things together, we understand that after he's called these men to him, and Peter, James, and John, and Andrew, and the other men fully are following him, he goes about teaching and preaching in cities and the region around, and then he goes up to the mountain, and he's preaching the Sermon on the Mount, and as he's coming back, then the leper comes, and he heals him. And Luke just tells us this is what happens. All right, after he heals the leper, he enters into Capernaum. He heals the paraplegic man. That's the man that he lets down through the roof. And this is the next event that is happening. You notice Matthew completely, it goes Matthew 8, 1 through 5, and then Matthew 9. There's a whole section. Now, okay, after he enters into Capernaum, there's the calling of Matthew. And he goes to Matthew's house. Now, this is where Luke and Mark have the next event in a completely different order. Now, I want you to see this, okay? Turn to Matthew 9. Now, I want you to see this because this is when I say a major change, it's just different from the way we taught it, okay? Because I am following Luke's gospel as far as the overall chronological perspective, okay? But Matthew lets us know something. He reveals something that lets us know when this happened. Now, in Matthew chapter number 9, okay, the event that is taking place is verse number 9. Okay, let's start right there. And as Jesus passed forth from thence, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the receipt of custom, and he saith unto him, Follow me. And he arose and followed him. Okay. The next verse, and it came to pass as Jesus sat at meat in the house. Now, we don't know from Matthew whose house this is. Okay, but according to Luke and Mark, according to Luke, we know that he went to Matthew's house. So after Matthew is saved, follows Jesus, he invites him to come to he says, Jesus, I want you to come to my house. I want you to meet my friends. They need to meet you. Okay? That's what's happening in Matthew 9:10. He's at Matthew's house. Okay. Verse 14. Then came to him the disciples of John, saying, Why do we and the Pharisees fast oft, but thy disciples fast not? And then the Lord talks to them about fasting and the old wine bottles and new wine bottles. Okay, verse 18. While he spake these things unto them, behold, there came a certain ruler and worshipped him, saying, My daughter is even now dead, but come and lay thine hand upon her, and she shall live. Now, on our timeline, this is number 36. This is when Jesus heals the woman with the issue of blood and raises Jairus' daughter from the dead. Now, on our timeline, okay, the order, and when I say my corrected order, this event, according to Matthew, while he spake these things unto them, happens while he is at Matthew's house. Okay? Now, just because I want you to see this. Okay, now turn to Luke. Turn to Luke chapter number 5. We're going to look at this first in Luke 5, and then look at one other thing in Luke's gospel to see where Luke puts it. And Mark puts it in the same place. Mark and Luke put it in the same place. Okay, now, in Luke chapter 5, verse number 29, the Bible says, And Levi made him a great feast. Now, Levi is Matthew. Okay, this is Matthew. This is Levi, okay? So he makes him a great feast. Okay, jump down to verse 33. And they said unto him, Why do the disciples of John fast often and make prayers, and likewise the disciples of the Pharisees, but thine eat and drink? Now notice, Matthew tells us he's at a house. And the Pharisees and John's disciples ask him, Why do we fast and your disciples do not? Luke is telling us the same thing. They're in Levi's house. They're at Matthew's house. They're eating and drinking, and the Pharisees, the disciples of the Pharisees and the disciples of John ask him, Why do we fast and they do not? The Lord gives them the same answer. Old wineskins, old wine, new cloth, all of that. Luke ends that in verse 39, and he just begins chapter number 6, and it came to pass on the second Sabbath. Luke does not tell us that Jairus comes to him here. But when does Luke tell us? Okay, turn to Luke chapter number 8. Now, this is odd. I'll put it out there. I have no problem putting it out here, saying this, because I remember when we went over this, the reason I believe that Luke does this and the reason I believe Mark does this is because Mark and Luke at this point are not following a chronology or a specific order, okay? But that Mark and Luke are addressing the miracles of Christ just as Matthew does at times, and they're lumping them together, okay? But in Luke chapter number 8, this event in Luke 8 is when the Lord goes to the other side of the sea and he heals the man with legion, all the demons, and he casts them out and they all run to the pigs. Okay. Now, when that happened, look at verse number 39. Luke 8:39. The Lord tells this man, "Return to thine own house and show how great things God hath done unto thee." And he went his way and published throughout the whole city how great things Jesus had done unto him. And it came to pass that when Jesus was returned, the people gladly received him, for they were all waiting for him. Verse 41, and behold, there came a man named Jairus, and he was a ruler of the synagogue, and he fell down at Jesus' feet and besought him that he would come into his house. Now, when we read this in Luke, it seems like when the Lord returns from the land, the country of the Gadarenes, after casting out the demon, and they run into the pigs, that he leaves and he comes to the other side, and they're waiting for him. And when he arrives, behold, there comes a man asking him to come to his house. Okay, as we read, that's how it seems to be happening. Okay. Now, one, according to Matthew, that's not what happened. According to Matthew, he is at Levi's house. He's at Matthew's house when Jairus comes. So why is this? Why is this seeming contradiction? Well, there's not a contradiction. Why? Because Luke is not saying that it happened at this moment. Luke simply says, "Behold, there came a man to him wanting help." That's all that it says. And second, in Luke's gospel, as we read this, there's several major events that the Lord is, or that Luke is focusing on when it comes to the preaching of the parables of the kingdom of the gospels, the miracle of passing on to the other side and the calming of the storm, the casting out of the demons, and now the power over death. Okay, so Mark and Luke, what they're doing is, as they're telling us the story of these accounts, they're lumping them together. Okay, that's what it seems like, and this is what it appears to be. And that is my opinion. That's what I believe. And so the reason I'm mentioning that to you is that I didn't preach it in that order. Okay, I preached it. I was following straightly, going through what Luke had, but I want you to see that Matthew is putting that event a little bit earlier. Now, so we'll go back to the timeline. On number 36, Jesus heals the woman with the issue of blood. Okay, after that, Jesus heals, number 37, Jesus heals 2 blind men, and he casts out a demon in Matthew chapter number 9, verse 27 and 34. Matthew lets us know in Matthew 9:27 that when Jesus departed, when he departed from raising Jairus' daughter from the dead, 2 blind men came to him, and then they brought a man that was possessed with a demon, and he heals him. Okay, now, what I believe happens next is what we've just preached on in John 5. Jesus heals the lame man on the Sabbath day in Jerusalem. Now, I know that I didn't preach that at this particular point, okay? Some believe that this may have happened, a little bit earlier than what happens, okay? But looking back over this, I think that John 5, what we just went over, happens here at this moment. He goes to Jerusalem for a feast, and while he is at that feast, while he's at that feast, he heals the man on the Sabbath day, and he has this major confrontation with the Pharisees, in which we've just taught on. Okay, after that, he leaves Jerusalem. He goes back to his ministry. Number 39. Jesus' disciples. Jesus' disciples eat corn on the Sabbath day. Okay, and now we're going back to Luke and Mark and Matthew. Okay, after his disciples were eating corn on the Sabbath day, he then heals another man on the Sabbath day, number 40. Now, someone may say, well, brother, if you think that John 5 happened before, why would they be mad in number 40 if he heals again on the Sabbath day? Why would he be, what's going on? Well, number 38, he heals the man in Jerusalem. Number 40, he's not in Jerusalem. He's in another city. It's very possible that A, they didn't know about it, which I find highly doubtful. B, he does it in another city to show them that he has authority to do this on the Sabbath day. Number 41, the Pharisees are angry, and Jesus leaves the city. They're looking for him, and he leaves. On the next slide, number 42, at the top, Jesus goes to the mountain to pray. While he is at the top of that mountain the next day, number 43 at the bottom, Jesus calls his apostles. We see that in Luke and we see that in Mark. Now, Jesus comes down from the mountain and he preaches in the plain in Luke 6:17 through 19. Now, this is another one of those instances where people say, wait a minute, Matthew and Luke, they're not getting it straight. Okay. Because you get to number 45, and Jesus is preaching to his disciples. Now, Luke chapter 6, verse 20 through verse number 49, is very similar to the Sermon on the Mount. He says a lot of the same things. He repeats a lot of what was already said. Well, is it the same thing? See, they're getting it mixed up, but we know that it's not the same event. Because in Matthew 5, he goes up to the mountain and he is teaching on the mountain. Okay? In Luke chapter 6, the Bible says he's coming down from the mountain and he teaches while he's standing in the plain. In Matthew 5, the disciples are coming to him. In Luke chapter number 6, he calls and he appoints his 12 apostles that he's called to follow them. And so although there's very similar things, it's two different circumstances. Well, you mean, whoa, I got my numbering out of order real bad, didn't I? Okay, I'll address that in a few minutes. I apologize for that. I see something that I did. Okay. Two different events. No. Jesus can repeat himself. Jesus can preach the same sermon in two different places. That's not a big deal. That's not a big deal at all. All right, now, I didn't realize this when I'm going over when I was going over but right there on the PowerPoint, you can see it says number 49 on the handout. That should be a number 46. So all of these numbers, I will correct that. Wow. It should be number 46 that Jesus heals the centurion's servant. Okay. So he comes down from preaching to his disciples, and in Luke 6, now he heals the centurion servant. He goes from healing the centurion servant in Luke chapter number 7. He goes to the city of Nain, raises this woman's son from the dead. That leads us next on the handout again, it's number 51, to the doubting of John the Baptist. To the doubting of John the Baptist. We see that in Luke and in Matthew. From that point, Jesus goes to Simon the Pharisee's house in Luke chapter number 7. Okay, verse 36 through 50. Now, I have in parentheses right here on the handout, woman washes Jesus' feet. Now, I have that in parentheses because that's what is happening in Luke. This is my opinion. Okay, this is my opinion, and I want to make sure that I say that for sure. I believe that what we're seeing in Luke 7, verse 36 through 50, when Jesus' feet are washed by this woman, that it's the same house that Jesus goes to in Mark chapter 3, verse number 19. I believe it's the same. I believe it's the same event happening. While Christ, again, my opinion, I know this, okay? And the reason why I believe it is because of the event that happens after this is the preaching of the parables, okay? While Jesus is there at Simon's house, the woman comes and washes his feet. I believe, number 53 at the top, that Jesus is in the house. While he is at that house, in Mark's gospel as well as in Matthew's gospel, and I have it right here in Luke, the little stars beside it, that someone then brings a demon-possessed man. I believe this with all my heart, that what happens is that Jesus goes to this Pharisee's house. While he is there, this woman comes in, washes his feet. after she washes his feet, the Lord is talking to them. They bring in somebody that is demon-possessed. He heals this man. He casts out the demon, okay? That's number 54. Jesus heals the demon-possessed man. We see that in Matthew 12, verse 22 through verse 24. After that, the Pharisees claim at number 55 that Jesus is possessed with a devil in Matthew 12, okay? I still believe he's in that house, okay? And I'm hoping as we go through this, as we continue going. All right, now on the next slide, the next page, and we are almost finished getting through this, okay? The review, and I'm going to go back and fix that mix-up. Number 56, Jesus preaches the sermon to the Pharisees. Now, we see this in Matthew 12, verse 24 through verse 45, as well as Mark 3, 22 through 29. Now, in Matthew and in Mark, it's the same event. Jesus is in a house. They bring a demon-possessed man, and he casts the demon out. Okay, Matthew and Mark tell us this, and then he turns around and he preaches to them. We come now to number 57. At the end of Matthew, while he is at that house, Jesus' family desires to see him. Okay? And he tells them, listen, my family are those that are doing the will of God. We see that in Matthew 12, verse 46 through verse number 15. In Mark 3, 31 through 35, we see the same things happening. Now, this is why, number 58, this is why I believe that the woman washes the feet of Jesus in the same house that he casts out the demon, because of number 58. Jesus leaves the house that he's in, and he begins to preach the parables of the kingdom. Now, we know that in Matthew 13. I turn to Matthew 13. I think we went into some detail about this when we went through this, but I just want to see you again, show you again how the pieces are fitting together. Okay? Matthew 13, verse 1. Matthew 13, verse 1 says, "The same day went Jesus out of the house, sat by the seaside," and then what does he do? He preaches about the parables of the kingdom. Now notice what Matthew says. The same day he leaves the house. Well, what day is that? The day that he casts out the demon-possessed man, or the man possessed with the demon, he casts out the demon, and his family come to him and say, we want to see you. Matthew says the same day he leaves. So there's events that happen. After those events, he leaves. Okay? Turn to Mark chapter 4. Mark chapter 4. Okay. You know, actually look at the end of Mark 3. Okay? This is the same thing that happened in Matthew's account. Okay, Mark chapter number 3, look at verse 31. "And there came then his brethren and his mother, and standing without, sent unto him, calling him. And the multitude sat about him, and they said unto him, Behold, thy mother and thy brethren without seek for thee. And he answered them, saying, Who is my mother or my brethren? And he looked around about on them which sat about him, and said, Behold, my mother and my brethren, for whosoever shall do the will of God, the same is my brother and my sister, my mother." Now, that's the same thing that happened in Matthew. According to Matthew 13, he leaves the house and he begins to preach the parables. Notice what Mark does in Mark 4:1. "And he began again to teach by the seaside." Matthew 13:1 tells us the same thing. He sat by the seaside. In Mark's account, what does he do? He begins to preach to them about the parables. All right, now turn to Luke chapter number 8. And again, I'm going into some detail about this, okay? I just want I really want us to see, and I want you to see how the Gospels, how they are so different, and yet how they fit together. You know, if we Just because they don't line up line upon line upon line, they're not supposed to line up line on line. God didn't want them to line up line on line. He wanted okay, this fits here, this fits there, and because He's given us a whole picture. Now, Luke chapter 7, verse 15. And He said to the woman, thy faith hath saved thee, go in peace. Okay, now we come to Luke 8. And it came to pass afterward. Well, after what? After the events in the house with the woman, that He went throughout every city and village, preaching and showing the glad tidings of the kingdom of God, and the 12 were with Him. You jump down to verse number 4, and when much people were gathered together and were come to Him out of every city, He spake by a parable. The next thing that happens in Luke's gospel, He leaves. Now, Luke tells He's preaching in all of these different cities, which He does. But Luke is giving us an overview of what He is doing. But he brings it back to verse 5. He is speaking to them in and about the parables. Now, I said all of that, and I went into all of that, said all that. The reason why I believe that the woman washing the feet of Jesus and the casting out of the demonic spirit out of that man, I believe it's happening in the same house. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and then they're showing how all of it's together, and right after He leaves the house, afterwards, He's preaching in the city, but He goes to the seaside and He's preaching the parables. Now, that brings us to Luke. This is a very interesting thing. Look at Luke 8. We're still there. Look at verse number 19. He has just preached to them the parables. Okay? Then came to Him His mother and His brethren, and could not come at Him for the press. And it was told Him by a certain which said, thy mother and thy brethren stand without, desiring to see thee. And he answered and said unto them, my mother and my brethren, these which hear the word of God and do it. Whoa, didn't that happen in Matthew? Are they getting them out of order? It did happen in Matthew. So then why is Luke putting it here at the end? Then came to Him His mother and His brethren, because it happens again. He's in the house. They come to Him. Listen, Mom and brothers, my family are those that do the will of God. He leaves. He goes to the seaside. He's preaching about the parables. He doesn't stay at the seaside the whole time. And I'm going to show you that, okay? But while He is teaching these parables, His family still want to see Him. They come to Him again when He is finished with the parables, or as He is finishing with these parables. Now, number 60, turn back to Matthew 13. Okay? Something happens. Jesus sends the multitude away, and He goes into another house, and He teaches more about the parables. Now, in Matthew 13, verse 36, then Jesus sent the multitude away, and went into the house, and His disciples came unto Him, saying, declare unto us the parable of the tares of the field. So the Lord goes to the seaside. He's preaching the parables. Well, He doesn't stay there. He gets up and He starts walking. Now, not reading into it, but reading into it a little bit, what seems to happen is He's walking and He's going to a house somewhere. It's getting close to the end of the day. He's getting ready to go to bed or to retire for the evening or whatever it is He's going to do. I believe that in Luke 8, verse number 19 and 20, when His family is coming to Him and Him going to this house, before He says, I believe that Luke 8 is happening at this moment. As He is walking back to this house, His family come to Him. Hey, Jesus, we want to see you. Listen, I'm talking to them. He gets to a house. He tells the people in Matthew 13, listen, at the end of the day, I'm going to bed. Y'all leave. I'll talk to you tomorrow. He goes to the house. Then the disciples come to Him, and He teaches more parables, which brings us to number 61. After He teaches the parables to them, we come to Matthew 13, verse number 53. Verse 53, and it came to pass that when Jesus had finished these parables, He departed thence. He leaves the house. So he goes to a house. He explains some more of the parables to the disciples. Maybe his family comes and sees him then. I don't know. But it seems like his family, it's before he sends the multitudes away that his family wants to see him. Again, he sends the multitudes away. He goes to the house to get ready to go to bed, to retire, to rest, whatever. He explains the parables. It came to pass that when Jesus had finished these parables, he departed thence. Okay. Now, he's going to the house to go to sleep, to go to bed, to retire. I'm mentioning that because at this point we don't know. But Mark lets us know what happens. Now, turn to Mark 4. Okay? Mark 4. It's the chapter of the parables. Mark lets us know what happens. Okay? So, let's keep all of it in mind. He's in a house. I believe he is in the Pharisee's house. The woman comes, washes his feet. The demonic man comes, he casts out the demon. The Pharisees say he's a demon-possessed man casting out demon-possessed people or whatever. The Lord turns and he preaches to them. Family comes because there's so many people. Son, we want to see you. I'll talk to you later. These are those that are doing the will of God. He stands up. I have more teaching. He goes. He stands at the seaside. He's teaching parables to them. The day is getting late. Family comes back. Son, we want to talk to you. I'll talk to you later. I'm busy with these individuals. He begins to head to a house. Matthew says he's at the house. He sends the multitudes away. He goes inside. Maybe he's going inside to eat, to sleep. We don't know. He goes into the house. The disciples say, Lord, teach us more. Teach us more. We want to understand these things. The Lord teaches them. Matthew says he leaves. Look at what Mark says, Mark 4. This is after he's taught the parables. And the same day, when the even was come, he said then to them, let us pass over unto the other side. So the Lord is in a house in Matthew. While he's at that house, maybe while they're in the house, maybe he gets up and says, guys, let's go. All right, we're done. We've eaten, we're finished, or whatever. Mark lets us know that the same day, at the evening time, it's getting close to nighttime, the evening time, maybe 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the evening or in the afternoon, 5 o'clock, whatever. Let's go to the other side. Let's go and pack up our things, and we're going to go. Now, he's finished his parables. He goes to the house. He leaves the house. Now he says, guys, let's go over to the other side. What happens? The same day, on our little handout here, number 62, the same day Jesus gets in a boat to sail to the other side. That's when the storm comes. What does the Lord do when he gets in the boat? He goes to sleep. He goes to bed. The storm comes. Mark tells us about this. Luke tells us about this. And Matthew tells us about this. Okay? And then what happens, then we come to number 63. Jesus arrives in the country of the Gadarenes and casts out the demons. That is, we see that in Mark. We said in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Okay? Mark, it happens in chapter 5. Now, that's when we have in Mark and Luke's account, it seems like he leaves the Gadarenes and then he arrives on the other side and Jairus comes for his daughter to be raised and to be healed. Okay? According to Matthew's gospel, we know that's not when it happens. Mark and Luke, they are lumping miracles together here. Okay? They're giving us a great picture of what the Lord is doing. Okay? And it's not a contradiction. They're lumping some things together. They're just putting it in a different order, in a different place. Now, that is where we are in our study. So, in the life of Christ, even though I didn't preach it in this order, the last thing that we just looked at is he's raising the paralyzed man who can't walk in John 5. Okay? I got out of order. Shame on me. But I'm learning. And so, if I get out of order, I don't have no problem saying, nope, wrong order, let's correct it and let's move forward. Okay? We want to keep it in order. And so the last thing that we see is the Lord has just raised the little girl from, he's healed the woman with the issue of blood, raised the little girl back to life, and then the next thing that we have will be the sending out of the disciples, if I remember right. And so we will be looking at that. And I'm going to correct this. I'm going to try to upload the timeline on to the description down below on the YouTube in the description underneath this, so that if you want to pull this up at home, you can do that and print that off or have it. But before I do, I'm going to correct this on my timeline. The numbers. I got the numbers. I must have no idea why I went from number 45 to number 49. I don't know, but I did. So anyhow, we'll correct that. I hope that you at least see where we are with the life of Christ and where we have arrived. We've covered a lot in the life of Jesus, and we've really covering a lot, and look forward to covering the rest of it. Okay, up to this point, now we are, of course, no, this is me reading after other men. Okay, and they think that we are about a year into the Lord's ministry, a year, 3 months or so into His ministry, up to where we are. And I hope that you learned something long, almost an hour, and so didn't want to necessarily go that long. But anyway, I hope that you learned something. Go back and follow along best that you can. Go back and read some of these passages that we have listed, so that you can see how they fall in line and how they fit together. Especially some of the ones where we have 3 references. See how they all fit together. Look at the differences. Notice the similarities. The differences are good. Okay, that's great. It means that they didn't corroborate their story, but the similarities show that they saw the same events. And so follow along, and I hope that it will be a help to you. But we will have services on Sunday, and I hope that you can join us on Sunday morning.